Alex Eala is trending for backlash right now, not because of anything she did on a tennis court, because of a swirl of controversies that have nothing to do with her serve, her forehand, or her ranking, and everything to do with how the media, the internet, and a wave of misinformation have handled her sudden global fame. So let's actually dig into what's real here, what's exaggerated, and what's just flat out made up. Because the gap between the headlines and the truth is bigger than you'd think. Let's start with the one that's actually legitimate, because there is a real controversy buried in all of this noise, and it happened on live television in Canada. During Eala's run to the fourth round at the National Bank Open in Toronto, a Canadian broadcast aired a segment meant to celebrate her rise and her growing connection to the Filipino community. Instead, it turned into one of the more embarrassing moments of sports broadcasting this year. The anchor, discussing why Eala had become such a phenomenon, referred to her on air as an American of Filipino origin, and then followed that up by asking her guest why an American player was getting so much attention. The guest, who had been brought on specifically to speak about Eala's connection to Filipino communities abroad, never corrected the error. She simply moved past it and answered a different question entirely. Here's the part that made it so much worse than a simple slip of the tongue. Eala has no American background whatsoever. She was born and raised in Quezon City in the Philippines, before moving to Spain as a teenager on a scholarship to train at the Rafael Nadal Academy. There is no ambiguity here, no dual citizenship angle, nothing that would make the mistake even remotely understandable. It was simply wrong on live television, during a segment specifically framed around her cultural identity, and neither the anchor nor the guest corrected it in real time. The reaction online was fast, and it was brutal. Clips of the segment spread across social media within hours, and the criticism wasn't really about the anchor misspeaking so much as it was about the layers of carelessness stacked on top of each other. Viewers pointed out that the entire segment seemed to have been built without anyone doing basic research on the person it was supposedly celebrating. Others were frustrated that the guest, who runs an organization focused on empowering young Filipino Canadians, didn't seem to actually know who Eala was or use the moment to correct the record. One fan online summed up the frustration by pointing out how strange it was to botch basic facts about a player who, at that exact moment, was in the middle of one of the biggest breakout runs in recent WTA history. And that timing is really what turned a sloppy TV segment into a genuine controversy. This wasn't some minor player nobody had heard of. This happened while Eala was actively making history, in the middle of a run to the round of 16, about to face a former top 5 player next. The volume of people watching her matches, and by extension watching coverage about her, was at an all-time high. A mistake that might have quietly slipped by during a quieter stretch of her career instead landed in front of the largest audience she'd ever had, and it landed hard. To be fair to everyone involved, mistakes happen in live broadcasting all the time, and misidentifying someone's nationality on air, while embarrassing, isn't usually treated as a career-ending scandal. But I think what made this one stick was less about the error itself and more about what it represented. Eala's entire story, from a Filipino sports perspective, has been about visibility, about a country that has never had a genuine global tennis star finally getting one, and about the pride that comes with the entire world learning to say her name correctly and know exactly where she's from. Getting that basic fact wrong, on a broadcast specifically built around celebrating her connection to her community, felt like a real gut punch to a lot of the people who had been following her story closely. So that's controversy number 1, and it's the one with an actual verified on-air record behind it. Now let's get into the stuff that's a lot murkier, because this is where things start to get genuinely strange. There's been a wave of viral videos online, mostly on YouTube and TikTok, claiming that Eala was involved in some kind of dramatic, headline-grabbing incident involving Oprah Winfrey and the daytime talk show The View. According to these videos, Eala supposedly had a tense confrontation with Winfrey and was even pursuing legal action against the show. It sounds explosive. It's also, as far as any credible reporting can tell, completely fabricated. There's no record anywhere of Eala appearing on The View, no record of any confrontation involving Oprah Winfrey, and no reputable news organization has reported anything resembling a lawsuit or dispute between Eala and either party. What actually seems to have happened is that a completely unrelated moment from her career got twisted into fuel for this narrative. Back at the 2024 US Open, Eala was involved in a disputed net crossing call during a tense match against Clara Towson, a moment that generated some legitimate debate among tennis fans at the time about how the rule was applied. That's a real, if fairly minor, tennis controversy. Somewhere along the way, content creators looking to cash in on Eala's rising profile appear to have taken that real but unrelated incident and repurposed it, stitching it together with fabricated claims about Oprah and The View to manufacture a story that never happened. This is worth pausing on, honestly, because it's a pretty clear example of a broader pattern that's been happening across sports media for years now. As an athlete's visibility grows quickly, so does the incentive for low-effort content channels to generate clickbait using their name, especially when that name can be paired with an even bigger celebrity for extra shock value. Combining a rapidly rising young star with someone as globally recognizable as Oprah Winfrey is basically a guaranteed formula for views, regardless of whether there's a shred of truth behind it. And because Eala's fame has exploded so quickly this year, she's become exactly the kind of target these channels look for. Famous enough that people will click, but new enough to global fame that a lot of casual viewers don't have a strong enough baseline understanding of her actual career to immediately spot when something's been invented. The unfortunate result is that a decent chunk of the audience seeing these videos has genuinely walked away believing something happened that simply didn't. That's not a minor issue. Misinformation like this doesn't just embarrass the athlete involved, it actively confuses fans who are trying to follow a real, remarkable career and instead end up with a head full of fabricated drama that has nothing to do with anything she's actually accomplished. Then there's a completely different kind of manufactured controversy, and this one ventures into genuinely dangerous territory because it drags Eala into domestic politics in a way she never asked to be part of. A graphic began circulating on social media that falsely attributed a political statement to Eala, specifically regarding Philippine Vice President Sara Duterte. The fake graphic, designed to look like an official quote card from a legitimate Philippine news outlet, claimed Eala had made a comment distancing herself from the vice president over a supposed green outfit incident, essentially trying to paint Eala as making a political statement she never actually made. The broadcaster whose branding was used on the fake graphic confirmed publicly that the quote was entirely fabricated and that Eala never said anything of the sort. This is, in a lot of ways, the most concerning piece of this entire backlash story, because unlike the Oprah rumor, which is mostly just embarrassing misinformation, this one deliberately tried to pull an athlete into a live, contentious political situation without her consent, using a fake graphic designed to look convincingly official. Eala has built her entire public identity around representing her country with pride, giving Filipino tennis fans a reason to rally together regardless of their politics. Having her name weaponized to look like she's taking sides in a political dispute she never commented on isn't just unfair to her. It's the kind of thing that can genuinely damage how she's perceived by segments of the public who don't dig deep enough to realize the quote never happened in the first place. It's a pattern that's become depressingly familiar for any public figure who reaches a certain level of visibility. The bigger the platform, the more valuable it becomes to bad actors looking to put words in someone's mouth for engagement, or worse, for actual political manipulation. Eala didn't do anything to invite this. She simply became famous enough, fast enough, that someone decided her name carried enough weight to be useful for a fake quote card. Now let's talk about something that actually did happen, captured on video, real and undeniable, but which I think has been massively overblown in how it's been framed as controversy. During her historic 2025 US Open run, in the third set of her upset win over then 14th seed Clara Towson, Eala was caught on a hot mic, letting out a Filipino expletive after winning a crucial point at the net in a match where her opponent was serving for the win. Some corners of the internet ran with this as some kind of scandal, a young player behaving badly on the biggest stage of her career. Come on. Anyone who's watched professional tennis for more than a handful of matches knows this happens constantly, across every ranking, every nationality, every era of the sport. Players scream in frustration, in triumph, in relief, in every emotion in between, often in their native languages, often with words that wouldn't be printed in a family newspaper. It's one of the most human parts of top-level competition. The idea that this moment, a raw burst of emotion during a match where she was fighting off match-point pressure and made history as the first Filipino ever to win a Grand Slam main draw match in the Open era, should be treated as some kind of black mark against her character is, frankly, a stretch. If anything, that moment is one of the more relatable, human snapshots of just how much pressure she was under and how much that win meant to her. There's another story that got labeled controversial, though this one is a lot gentler and honestly ended up working out beautifully for her. Back in June, at the Bad Homburg Open, Eala teamed up with tennis legend Venus Williams for a doubles event. The pairing was a big deal on its own, a rising star sharing a court with one of the most decorated players in the sport's history. The two reached the quarterfinals together before losing. When the Washington Open rolled around a few weeks later, the two were scheduled to reunite as a doubles pair once again. Instead, Eala made the decision to skip the doubles event entirely and focus solely on her singles run. Some fans and commentators questioned the decision at the time, wondering why she'd walk away from another chance to play alongside someone as legendary as Venus Williams. But the outcome pretty quickly answered that question for her. Eala went on to win the entire singles title in Washington, beating 4 incredibly difficult opponents en route to the final, and then completing that dramatic comeback win over Jessica Pegula. Whatever mild second-guessing existed about skipping the doubles event evaporated the moment she lifted that trophy. In hindsight, it looks less like a controversial decision and more like exactly the kind of disciplined, focused choice that ends up defining a breakout season. Sometimes the controversy narrative just needs an athlete to actually prove the doubters wrong, and this is about as clean an example of that as you'll find. And then there's the more abstract kind of backlash, not a single incident, but an ongoing grumble from a certain corner of tennis fandom that there's simply too much hype around Eala. Too many watch parties, too much media attention for a player who, despite everything, is still working her way toward the very top of the sport rather than sitting at it. This one isn't rooted in any specific controversy so much as it's a general resistance to the sheer scale of Eala-mania as it's exploded across the tennis world this year. It's worth noting that this pushback got a pretty direct and pretty forceful response from someone with real credibility in the tennis world. Andy Roddick, the former world number 1 and US Open champion, addressed the criticism head-on, essentially telling doubters not to bother with that kind of negativity. His point was straightforward. Eala isn't just having a good season, she's building an entirely new wave of tennis fandom that largely didn't exist before her rise. The kind of grassroots global excitement that the sport doesn't get handed very often. Watch parties packed beyond capacity for a fourth-round Grand Slam match. That's not manufactured hype. That's a genuine cultural moment, and according to Roddick, it deserves to be celebrated rather than picked apart. So when you actually lay all of these stories out side by side, a pretty clear picture starts to emerge, and it's very different from what the phrase serious backlash might suggest at first glance. There's exactly one legitimate controversy in this entire pile, the Canadian broadcast segment that got her nationality wrong on live television, in a moment that genuinely deserved criticism given the context and the carelessness involved. Everything else ranges from wildly exaggerated to entirely fabricated. A raw human moment of emotion during a historic Grand Slam win got mislabeled as scandalous behavior. A perfectly reasonable scheduling decision that turned into a title-winning triumph got briefly and unfairly second-guessed. A completely fictional storyline involving Oprah Winfrey and a major talk show got manufactured out of thin air by content farms chasing views. And a fake quote card, deliberately designed to drag her into a political dispute she never touched, spread across social media before the broadcaster whose name was stolen for it had to step in and publicly deny it. What ties all of this together, I think, is simple. Eala's rise has been so fast, so unexpected, and so massive in scale that the appetite for content about her, real or invented, has completely outpaced most people's actual working knowledge of her career. When a public figure's fame grows faster than public understanding of who they actually are, that gap becomes a playground for misinformation. It becomes easy for a fake quote to spread, easy for an unrelated old controversy to get repurposed into a fictional new one, easy for careless broadcasters to get basic facts wrong because nobody bothered to double-check before airing. And honestly, that gap is probably going to keep existing for a while, because her story isn't slowing down. If anything, based on how the rest of this season has gone, a maiden WTA title, a career-high ranking, a historic 17th seed heading into Cincinnati, the volume of attention on her is only going to keep climbing. Which means, realistically, the volume of noise, misinformation, and manufactured drama surrounding her is probably going to keep climbing right alongside it. So what actually happened off the court when you strip away the sensational headlines and get down to the verified facts? A broadcaster in Canada made a genuinely embarrassing on-air mistake about her nationality, and neither the anchor nor the guest corrected it in the moment. A doubles decision that looked mildly questionable to some fans turned out to be exactly the right call once she went on to win the singles title outright. A raw, emotional moment during arguably the biggest win of her career got mislabeled online as some kind of scandal when it was really just a young athlete letting out pure human relief under enormous pressure. And two entirely separate pieces of fabricated content, one linking her to Oprah Winfrey and The View, the other dragging her into a fake political quote about the vice president, spread across social media specifically because her name has become valuable enough to exploit for clicks and, in the more troubling case, potentially for something worse. That's the real story behind the serious backlash headlines. Not a pattern of controversy following Alex Eala around because of anything she's actually done. A pattern of misinformation and careless reporting following her around because of how fast and how unexpectedly she's become one of the most talked about names in tennis. The tennis is real. The title in Washington is real. The historic seed heading into Cincinnati is real. Almost everything people are calling backlash around it, when you actually go looking for the receipts, turns out to be either wildly overblown or completely made up.